It's time for Speaking of Speaking. Quick tips and tools to take you from stage fright to spotlight. This podcast gives you an inside look from the world of public speaking and speaking secrets you need to be bold from the stage, no matter what business you're in. The host of Speaking, Carl Richards.
Thank you, Matt. Welcome to another edition of Speaking of Speaking. We have been doing this podcast now since 2019. I believe it was January when we launched, and it was a long time coming putting this podcast together. It actually took me from the first time I heard the words podcast to putting this episode together, I believe it was 7 years. Now, if I knew something about podcasting earlier than that, I probably would have started sooner, but I didn't. But now I do, and I certainly recognize the value in not only podcasting in general, because that's a lot of what my branding and business is now, but I also recognize the value for any entrepreneur, coach, consultant, subject matter expert, the value in using this not only as a platform for marketing, but looking at it as a speaking opportunity. So we are so glad to still be here today, providing information about communication strategies, speaking techniques, platform skills, all of those things. That's what this podcast has evolved into. So glad that after 4 years, going on 5 years, well into our 5th season, that we are still here. And you're still here as well. So thank you for being along with me and my team that helps me put the show together for the ride. I know that there are times when it's an interesting ride. Like any other journey, there are bumps in the road. And this past year, this is being recorded the end of 2022. This past year has certainly been a very interesting one for a lot of us. Myself, no exception. I mean, we're the tail end of a global pandemic. A lot of people, including myself, have shifted and pivoted in business multiple times. But I wanted to take the opportunity to at least be a little bit raw and real. There's no script to what I'm talking about today, but there's definitely something I wanted to share. And the first thing, as I said, is just to say thank you for being along with me on the journey, and also thank my team. My team, of course, being my business coach, Diana Lidstone, another coach that I have used on a regular basis, mostly with dealing with my inner crap, if I can say that word, Dana Ferrant, but also the people who work behind the scenes on this show. And that would be Kieran Doherty, who is my producer, and my virtual assistant, who is Stephanie Gafor. So I would not be where I am today with this podcast if I didn't have their help. And they didn't all start with me back in 2019 when we launched this show, but they are here for the ride now and here to help us put out the best content that we possibly can. So thank you for being here on the ride, and thank you to them for being a part of the journey as well. And I'm going to put their links in the show notes. I'll put the links for Diana and Stephanie and Kieran. I believe I can put his, and Dana as well. Kieran, I can put his link to his LinkedIn page. You'll be able to check him out there. What I really wanted to do today is, rather than just reflect on 2022, I know a lot of people do that. They'll do a year in review. I could do that, but what I wanted to do was share with you a little bit about the pivot in my business. Just reassure you too that this podcast isn't going anywhere. This podcast will remain intact, but that the focus on the business now, though we still do work with people in relation to their speaking, we focus more in the podcasting space. And reason being that when the pandemic began, there really weren't any live stages. There were live virtual stages, and many of them evolved at that time. But one of the things that we realized very quickly was that, in all intents and purposes, as I already mentioned earlier in this episode, a podcast is basically a speaking opportunity. So I was able to pivot and help clients in that space, but then I was also able to help people launch their own podcasts and help them become more successful, more recognizable, the go-to expert or go-to authority with their own platform, their own stage, their own podcast. And that's been very rewarding in many ways. I really, when getting into this business of speaking and speaker training, my goal was always to help people in that success and celebrate with them. That is still true today, even though we've pivoted into the podcasting space. And I wanted to pose this question, and you probably got something from the title. Are you my ideal client? And I want you to think about this firstly from my perspective and where I'm coming from, but I want you to think about it from your perspective as well. Think about it and ask yourself this question. Not just, are you my ideal client, but think about who your ideal clients are. And could you ask those individuals the same question I'm asking you and explain it in a way that I'm going to explain it to you today? So are you my ideal client? How does that really break down? Here's who I look for. There's no harm or foul if you're not my ideal client, by the way. If you've been a follower of this podcast and love the content and want to keep following along, that's great. But I want you to ask yourself, am I really the type of person that Carl is looking for? When Carl is speaking, is he speaking to me? And I want to make sure that I am, obviously. But I also want to possibly present an opportunity for you and I actually, maybe to work together into 2023, which is just around the corner at the recording of this podcast, maybe even beyond that, who knows? But are you my ideal client? And as I said, ask yourself this question, or think of if you have your own podcast, for example, think of how you're framing this question with prospects. And that's why I wanted to pose this question today. Are you my ideal client? So who is my ideal client? Who is that? Well, my ideal client I've recognized in the podcasting space, but I believe also in the speaking space. I believe my ideal clients are coaches. They could be life coaches. They could be wellness coaches. So coaches, consultants is another one. And consultants and coaches tend to go hand in hand, but consultants can be a very broad term as well, just like coach. But coaches, consultants, and other subject matter experts. And when I think of subject matter experts, I think of real estate agents, maybe even real estate brokers, financial professionals, doctors, lawyers, speaker trainers. As a matter of fact, speakers are also my ideal client, be they platform speakers, or be they virtual speakers, or be they a little bit of both, be they keynote speakers. If they want to expand their reach, if they want to be seen as the authority or the go-to expert, then a podcast is perfect for that. So that's why those individuals become my ideal client, right? So coaches, consultants, other subject matter experts, and speakers. And even in the speaking space, so thinking of people who might want to brush up on their speaking skills, their platform skills, their gestures, body language, movement, scripting of their talks, whatever it is, still make them my ideal client, because not only are we now looking at the platform spaces and you're getting on a physical stage, now we're looking at your skill set from a virtual space, a podcasting space, a space of speaking on virtual summits. So there's many different ways to view this. My ideal client is probably not brand new in business. They've probably been around for at least a couple of years. They've figured some things out. The business basics, they've already mastered them, or they've done a reasonably good job to get things established. They're probably not brand new, because when you're brand new, what are you looking for? The biggest thing you're looking for is clients. And maybe you don't even have the budget to hire a coach, or it's certainly not the best time in your first couple of years, typically, to have your own podcast, because you don't have the credibility. You're not vying to be seen as the authority because you're still new in this space. You're vying to be seen as somebody who is well on their way. They're getting started. You might even want to share that with people, that you're just getting started, but you have some skill sets and you have some knowledge and experience, maybe in a past job or career that has put you to where you are today. So in thinking about this, my ideal client, they're coaches, consultants, subject matter experts, again, doctors, lawyers, real estate professionals, financial professionals, people who have an expertise in something. They're in business for, I would say, 2 to 5 years, maybe even beyond that, minimum. They recognize that maybe they aren't filling their calendar as much as they'd like to with sales calls. They're maybe not even getting as many speaking gigs as they'd like. And they're looking for ways to not only get more speaking gigs on physical stages, but on virtual stages, be they podcasts, be they summits, especially podcasts, because that's the space that I operate in a lot now. My ideal client could be anywhere in the world. Because of the space that we work in, most of it is the virtual space. if we're looking at just the virtual space alone, you could be anywhere in the world. That's the lovely thing about this podcast is we talk to people from all over the world. We've had some great discussions with people from Australia, all over the US, Germany, England, all kinds of different places. You could be an ideal client too if you're recognizing that when you're looking at your marketing, specifically a podcast, you recognize that it's not an expense, it's an investment, and that anything in an investment to grow your business, your brand, your credibility, to elevate your expertise is of huge value, as opposed to the individual who might think of it as an expense and who might immediately think of it as, how can I have my podcast make me money? Because your podcast isn't designed, in my opinion, to make money. It's designed to be a tool that brings people to your website, to your other services that you offer. What's that investment worth to you? Okay, so my ideal client, again, coaches, consultants, subject matter experts, probably not brand new in business, 2 to 5 years at least, and beyond that. They are looking at an investment for their marketing, or they recognize that they want to be seen as the go-to expert and realize that there might be something else they need to do that's different from what they're doing now with the platforms or channels that they're using or the stages that they're getting on. They need to expand beyond that. So the ultimate question now goes back to, are you my ideal client? Because if you think you are my ideal client, and if you believe that, yes, Carl, I am your ideal client, then let's have a conversation. If you believe that you are my ideal client, you've heard what I've said, and you go, yes, Carl, I totally believe you are. We need to have a conversation. And by the way, the conversation takes about 30 minutes, and we explore how I can best serve you. From there, we figure out, is there something I can do to help you move forward over the next 3 months, 6 months, 12 months, or even beyond that? So if you believe you're my ideal client, let's chat. I'll post the contact information to book some time with me in the show notes. But in the meantime, I want you to reflect on this too as you look at a new calendar year. Again, this being recorded the end of 2022, heading into 2023. Who are your ideal clients? And what kind of conversations should you be having with those individuals to see if they are ready to do business with you, to see if they are ready to explore other opportunities or even joint venture partnerships with you? And that's what I wanted to share today. So I wanted to first say thank you, thank my team, and then also say or share with you, if you are my ideal client, especially if you'd like to get into that podcasting space, let's have a conversation. Happy to hear from you. And as we end this podcast all the time, I'm going to say, remember, get out there and own the platform.
Thanks for listening to the Speaking of Speaking podcast. Fired up about something you heard today? Want to learn more? Be sure to visit carlspeaks.ca. And don't forget to follow Carl on Twitter @CarlRichards72 or join the Facebook group Speaking of Speaking.